Well, time now to have a look at the economic week ahead with ENCA's business anchor, Ropiwa Madzena. Ropiwa, let's talk a little bit about the biggest story of the week, which will be the budget speech. But first, you also want to talk about unemployment data out next week?
That's right, Faith. It's going to be a very busy week next week with economic data coming out. But the most important one to watch out for will be the unemployment numbers that we're going to be seeing. So currently, the unemployment rate is sitting at 30.8%. And the government has been trying some initiatives under the reconstruction and economic plan to create the economy, to create jobs, rather, to stimulate the economy. So they've committed about 100 billion rand to create employment opportunities in various sectors, one of the most important being the infrastructure and manufacturing sectors. So we might see a little bit of a dip in the unemployment data out this week, but we might see that the presidential employment initiatives would have created jobs in that final quarter of the year that we'll be looking at. So onto this story now, the biggest one, as Faith has mentioned. So the growing fiscal deficit and new funding requirements, such as the vaccine program, means that government will most likely need to increase taxes somewhere. And while some economists don't foresee increases in the likes of VAT and wealth tax, government is still faced with the task of finding the money from somewhere. Joining me now to discuss this further is Michael Hewson, who's the director at Grapevine Economics. Michael, many thanks for your time this evening. It's a big task that the finance minister and his team have ahead of them in terms of drawing up a budget when there's very little to draw from.
Absolutely, and firstly, good evening and good evening to your listeners. I completely agree that the Minister of Finance's job on Wednesday will be particularly difficult because somehow he's going to need to find a growth story and share some good news and give a little bit of indication of some growth stimulus. We should remember that it's not only COVID-19, it was the years leading up to COVID-19 that we saw stagnant levels of growth. COVID-19 exacerbated this. Our level of growth is expected by National Treasury to drop to about 7.8% down on 2019. It's estimated that it'll take at least 4 to 5 years for us to recover to 2019 levels. So it certainly will take time. And as you correctly pointed out, our levels of debt are really high. Our debt service costs are increasing, while one of our larger components of expenditure. So the strings that the minister can use are limited, but I do believe that there are some opportunities to create some stimulus opportunities in the budget.
One of those strings that you've just talked about, or we could talk about even further, is this issue of taxes and increasing taxes. Various stakeholders in various industries, like the alcohol and tobacco industries, for example, saying that the minister needs to hold off on increasing taxes. But really, as you've just mentioned, there's very little to get revenue from, especially when the collection of taxes continues to decline.
Absolutely. You've referred to some of the consumption-based taxes, whether it's VAT or excise, and it will be very difficult to squeeze the consumer much more on that. In fact, the consumer household savings numbers are right down at the moment in South Africa, and general consumption levels are still being hit very hard. In fact, the minister, I think, might look to give some relief to consumers to encourage and stimulate the economy. What will be interesting is what she chooses to do on the sectors that you mentioned, the tobacco and alcohol sector. They have indeed been hit extremely hard during the course of 2020. It'll be interesting to see what action is taken. We're very used to by now seeing higher than inflation increases on the so-called SIM taxes. And what's interesting is because those products are relatively price inelastic, it means that it doesn't naturally deter the levels of demand for those products, and ultimately that much of that increase in cost is passed on to the consumer. So it will impact the consumer, hopefully not the industry too much. But another interesting aspect is the discussion on the illicit sector in those particular markets and what can be done to raise revenue from those other sectors in the economy. You mentioned how we need to look for additional money for COVID vaccines and other relief packages. What's interesting is that recently it was announced that the collections by SARS late last year and early this year is beyond above expectation. That's partly driven from the mining tax royalty and the collections from the higher commodity prices. as well as better than expected corporate income taxes. So there are some areas that are generating higher than expected growth in revenue, but the consumer is probably one sector where we want to tread very lightly at this stage.
Right, but Michael, government relying solely on taxes as a form of revenue to run the country is not something that is sustainable. So what are the other ways in which government can look at to start to not only stimulate the economy, but find other sustainable avenues of revenue?
One of the big ways is foreign direct investment, and the President has been very clear that he's looking to drive the growth in foreign direct investment and investment-led growth. You mentioned earlier the economic plan that government has announced recently to reconstruct and rebuild the economy. A big factor and feature of that is foreign direct investment, and looking to encourage foreign investors to put money into the economy. There are a couple of factors that are really important to ensure that this is sustainable. One is that we create a competitive environment. We need to be able to show that South Africa is a competitive place where there is real growth opportunities and a good growth story. And that touches on a number of interesting points. Technology and the rollout of 5G being an important one, and how we capacitating businesses to operate in the technology world as well.
Very interesting insights there. That is Michael Hewson, Director at Graphene Economics, giving us some insights into some of the ways in which the Minister could maneuver on Wednesday when he delivers that all-important budget speech. And that's all from the Money Desk. We'll definitely be bringing you some of the latest news around that, Tembekile, and more economic data that's coming out next week. Investors in the mining sector will still continue some good results as mining companies deliver solid revenue for their investors.
Ropio Matsana from the ENCA Money Desk. Ropio, thank you.